Hey, thanks for tuning in. It's been quite a while since I did a solo video. I've been doing a lot of collaborative stuff with Lars, Fernando, and Roque in various kind of series that we are doing, and it is progressing very well. And there is a lot to actually take away from each of those series that I am doing, even personally for me. And I've also started doing a series with Steve Wilson, who's an evolutionary astrologer, and that has just started, and things are going quite well in terms of series. So I thought I would just take a break from um, doing regular transit stuff and concentrate on something that is actually useful for long run. Not that I'm kind of against transits. I do transits. I do transits for Vanita Lenka's YouTube channel, and it is just that I don't want to do a lot of repetitive stuff. So if there is something interesting that's coming up, I've been doing Decans for some time. I mean, I did Decans for some time, and I think I've continued doing Decans, but not in a very uh, regular manner or as such. So I wanted to do Saturn and third Deccan, but for some reason I couldn't do it. I couldn't find a lot of time in the middle due to various other reasons. And yeah, so I published an article on my website, which is theabverdict.com, on the Decans. I analyzed the Decans of the famous writer JRR Tolkien, who kind of created the Lord of the Rings, one of the finest ever fantasy stories ever written. I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, so, which in turn makes me a huge fan of JRR Tolkien as well. So I thought, I mean, I was kind of searching and looking out for charts that gave us a specific meaning in terms of analyzing with Decans. With the series that I'm doing, like the series that I'm doing with Rope Kotnik on Varga charts or the divisional charts, is basically kind of redefining or reorienting my understanding regarding the divisional charts and the actual usage of divisional charts. So now it is almost I'm just making an establishment as to why and what kind of pushed me to do this video. So I'm kind of subscribing to the understanding that there are two kinds of Vargas. That is, one is harmonic and the other is non-harmonic. Harmonic in the sense that kind of has a pattern from Aries to Pisces, like Navamsha, where the Aries has Ashwini first pada, second pada, like third pada. I mean, the it goes on like Aries like first pada of Ashwini is in Aries, and second in Taurus, and third in Gemini, fourth in Cancer, and then Bharani is first in Leo, and then Kritika's first in Sagittarius, and so on. So the nakshatras kind of the nakshatra padas kind of take the route forward in terms of bringing out or constructing a D9 chart which has a specific harmony in terms of calculating the order of the signs from Aries to Pisces. But that's not necessarily the case with Decans, at least the Decans that I'm using. I'm using the classic Vedic Decans that kind of prescribes uh, the usage of triplicity system. Like first decan of Aries is ruled by Mars, second decan of Aries is ruled by the immediate trine lord, that is the fifth lord, which means Sun, and the third decan is ruled by Jupiter, which is the ninth lord. So each decans are of 10 degrees in a sign. So basically, we divide the sign into three and assign the trine lords to the subsequent decan. So that's how it goes. And I was searching for looking out for charts in terms of using decans, and I found JRR Tolkien's very compelling to actually make an analysis. So I thought I would just do it. It's been quite a while since I published the article on my website, but I think it's still valid to kind of. It's always valid to kind of present an analysis as it is. So I think it's time for me to share the screen so that, yeah. So this is JRR Tolkien's chart, and we have Aquarius racing. And basically, I think I'll be using a little bit of Hellenistic concept in my like analysis as well, because Hellenistic astrology has become a major part of my astrology, and it's at this point it's very difficult for me to do kind of kind of analyze something without implementing some of the Hellenistic stuff. So here, the first basic factor is that the JRR Tolkien has Aquarius rising, and it's a day chart because Sun is placed. I mean, I think Sect, you can watch the videos on Sect that I did with Lars Panaro in the series called Visiting Valence, a series on Hellenistic astrology. So Sect is basically they use the round system, where maybe I'll just switch the screen to round. Okay, wheel chart. So it's here. I think I just found it. So here in the wheel chart, it kind of goes. The zodiac sign goes in an anti uh, clockwise manner, where you have usually it happens like Aries, Taurus, Gemini, but here it's Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on. So here, from the ascendant descendant axis, if Sun is placed above the horizon, it's a day chart, and if Sun is placed below the horizon, the particular chart is called as night chart. So let's not get into the details of what are the basic determinants or factors in terms of analyzing day and night chart, but I'll just use the day and night chart. So the day planets are the planets that do well in a day chart are Sun, Saturn, and Jupiter. And Saturn is the most constructive malefic in a day chart. And in the night chart, that is when Sun is placed below the horizon, we have Moon, Venus, and Mars being the major planets or beneficial planets, and Mars becomes the most constructive malefic in a night chart. So basically, Saturn doesn't do entirely well in a night chart, and Mars doesn't do entirely well, or it's not as constructive as we would expect in a day chart. So here, let's directly jump into the analysis, because I think we have done enough like pre-establishment or kind of things. So Aquarius ascendant, and straight away we see that the ascendant is placed in the third decan, that is 22.28 degrees, which is in the D3 chart. The rising will fall in Libra, so because it's the ninth sign, so 1, 5, and 9. So I'll change the D3 here so that it's easy. Yeah, so ascendant is in Libra, and which becomes Venus's decan. So first, let's establish how important Venus is in this chart. And Venus generally refers to art and fantasy kind of stuff, luxury art and fantasy. But I think the most important things, at least that are very relevant to J.R.R. Tolkien's chart, is the art and fantasy factor. So um, so basically, ascendant is placed in the third decan, which means there is a lot of Venusian influence, and the native is kind of inclined towards art and fantasy. So let's see how Venus is actually placed in the chart. Venus, which is the fourth and ninth lord, is placed in the 12th house, and thereby Venus loses its positional strength because 12th house, 6, 8, and 12 are generally termed to be as dushtanas or negative houses or hidden houses. I think hidden houses can be a better term because of the geometrical relationship that 6, 8, and 12 kind of have with the rising or ascendant. So Venus becomes the dispositor of Rahu, which is placed in the fourth house, and there is a trine aspect, but we'll get back to that later. And if you see, Venus is placed in the Capricorn, which is the 12th house, but Venus is placed in its own decan. So Venus is placed in 16, 17, which is the second decan of Capricorn, and second decan of Capricorn is Taurus, and Venus is placed in its own decan. And if you see in the D3 chart, Venus is placed in Taurus, uh, which is which is a very positive sign in terms of looking at the Decana chart. So let's not entirely rule out Venus because it's placed in the 12th house, but Venus is placed in its own decans. And Venus, let's take, I think it's good to use decans as a separate factor of dignity itself. I don't use the Decana as a standalone chart. I don't use the aspects in Decana chart because I don't think it is, as of now, I don't think it is actually viable to use it that way, or if it is right. If it, I'm not sure if it is right to use it that way. So I don't use D3 as a standalone chart, and I don't apply aspects that function that are actually existing in the D3 chart. So let's see that Venus is placed in the second decan of Capricorn and Taurus. Uh, so it's Venus is kind of placed in its own decan, and Venus has a fixed motive in terms of establishing art and fantasy. And uh, we also see that Venus rules the good houses, that is the fortunate houses to Capricorn ascendant, and thereby Venus becomes the Yoga Karaka for Aquarius rising, as Venus rules an angular house and a trine house, or Kendra house, and a Trikona house. So, which makes Venus a very powerful and a very important and a useful planet for Aquarius rising. And even though Venus is placed in 12th house, Venus is placed in its own decan, and 12th house is directly related to our thinking process and our mind. So Venus in a good decan, or indirectly Venus is in a very good dignity, and it kind of pushes the native in terms of thinking, the fantasy related and artistic kind of stuff. So Venus is very important in terms of helping us to understand why kind of JRR Tolkien did the Elvish stuff. Elvish is one of the most Venusian kind of stuff. If you have seen The Lord of the Rings, or if you have read The Lord of the Rings, so the setup of Rivendell or Imladris is one of the finest ever pieces of art and fantasy related work that we can find. In fact, the entire Lord of the Rings is a world of that was created by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. So Venus has importance in the 12th house, which is thinking, and Venus rules the ascendant from Deccan point of view. And Aquarius is a sign of evolutionary ideas, and Libra becomes the actual balancing force. Why I'm continuing or saying Libra is because the ascendant is placed in the third decan, and third decan falls in Libra, which is also ruled by Venus. So this kind of puts the native as an instinctive rider, and moreover, we also have Moon and Jupiter on the rising sign. So it's the conjunction of Moon and Jupiter, which is always very good. Even though Moon and Jupiter are quite far away from each other, I think the Moon Jupiter conjunction kind of adds a lot of value to the chart in terms of helping the native write. So whenever Moon and Jupiter are connected to the ascendant or the rising sign, the native is a bit inclined towards writing. And because of the fact that Venus is placed in the Venus is I mean ascendant is placed in the Venus's decan, here the native is involved in fantasy writing. So and Though Tolkien kind of created his own structures uh, when it comes to uh, the entire sequel or series of Lord of the Rings, where there is no one real thing that he used, uh, which was already existing in the world. He created a own structure of the world. He kind of split the world into. He gave directions as east, west, north, and south. Uh, he gave the Numenor and the other kingdoms of Aragon. He placed them in the north, and Mordor in the east, and Shire and other kind of things in the west. And there was Gondor, which was placed and be placed exactly in the entry of the east, or something like that. So he kind of created a map uh, for his own story or tale, whatever you may want to call it, and he called it as the Middle Earth. And this is probably because of the fact that Sun and Mercury are placed in the 11th house, and 11th house and Mars is placed in Venus's house. I mean, Venus becomes the dispositor of Mars, and there is a square that that is there between Mars and Venus. So, and especially the 11th house, Mercury retrograde and forming a sign-based sextile with Mars kind of gives uh, gives a talent or skill to the native that he can make things out of nothing, or he can form things out of nothing. So what basically Tolkien created is all about wonder world. So, and it is exactly symbolic or indicative of Mercury's retrograde nature, because when Mercury is retrograde, you do things that are generally uh, not necessarily supported by rationale. So that's pretty much the case that Mercury plays here. And if you see, yeah, Mars is placed in the third decan, and Mars is again, Mars is placed in Mercury's decan. Uh, so Mars has an instinctive capability of structuring things when it is placed in Mercury's decan, or when it is placed in relationship with Mercury. So we can kind of note that these people, Mercury and Mars, kind of produces different kind of writers. And here we know that Tolkien is entirely different from usual writings that other people had done during his times. Or probably, I think Tolkien was probably one of his kind. And before that, we just have myths that have been doing rounds. So we had various characters in terms of men, dwarves, hobbits, and elves, and so on. And even we have separate uh, theme where ends are formed, and trees are called ends, and trees start working and they go to war in Lord of the Rings. So yeah, so there are some of the major factors, and we also have Moon and Jupiter forming a square with Rahu in Taurus, and let's not forget Venus is the dispositor of Rahu. So we see that there is a different and a very hard square that is forming between Moon and Rahu, because Moon is placed at 120 Aquarius and Rahu is placed at 124 Taurus. So this kind of gives a fixed motive in terms of analyzing and creating fantasy. The native is inclined towards fantasy. It's not that native is not long away from reality, but still, it, Moon placed in between the nodal axis kind of brings a lot of uh, uh, it's kind of it is kind of an irony where the native lives in a very practical manner, but still things are rights in such a way that everything is kind of distant or far away from reality. So this chart is all about structures where Mars, Venus are in squares, and that is pretty much very indicative of structures that the um, various kind of structures that the author gave in terms of the buildings and constructions that are present in the Lord of the Rings. I think if you watch the movie, I think it will be even more clear to you, where there are several different structures to each and every place, and to each and every culture that the author kind of writes in the book. So yes, uh, so if you see here, Venus rules the chart in terms of talking about decans, because it rules the rising sign, and it rules Jupiter, which is placed in the Libra, like third decan of Aquarius, which is again Libra, and Jupiter placed on the ascendant, having Venus's influence, is also very good in terms of uh, bringing out the creative stuff that is necessarily not reality. Especially because Moon is placed there, and Moon really doesn't care about reality. Moon just helps the native do what the native wants to do. So if you see, Mars is placed in the third decan, which is ruled by Mercury, which is a natural benefic, and Saturn is placed in the first decan of Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. So even though Saturn is placed in the eighth house, let's not forget that Saturn is the actual. Uh, Saturn is one of the constructive uh, malefics in a day chart, and even though Saturn is placed in the eighth house, it kind of gives a perfectionism in terms of what the I mean, hardcore perfectionism. Let's not say just perfectionism, but hardcore perfectionism in terms of what the native does. So he becomes a very good taskmaster, and he establishes things in a very good manner, and also in a very likable manner to the audience or the readers. And this is probably because Venus is in trine to Saturn. So there is a lot of fan following when it comes to Lord of the Rings, and yeah. Uh, so the ninth Lord Venus, the Yoga Karaka, is kind of ruling major portions of the decans, which kind of pretty much, I mean, not major portions, but still at least the most important portions when it comes to a writer. So uh, I think analyzing decans as a part of dignity itself gives a lot of insights in terms of understanding a chart. So I'll try and come up with some other um, like Deccan based analysis in my next video, and this probably would add as a good supplement to the series that I am doing with Rob Kotnick. So if you have not watched the series, I think I would surely recommend you to go and check out the series, because it gives a lot of insights in terms of understanding the construction and the logic, at least from Rob's point of view, in terms of understanding the divisional charts in Vedic astrology. So I'll get back with another Deccan video or any other video that kind of interests me first, and then I'll put it forward to the viewers. So thank you so much.